Okay. So as folks are rolling in, if you could find the chat box and just let us know how you're doing today, if you were able to pick up your fall crops, get them in the ground. What are you guys excited about in terms of getting fall crops in the ground?
We're putting brassicas in right now. And so it's like crazy to think about. It's been so hot this summer. Like we've had these like real spells of hot. And so the idea of like wanting to eat Brussels sprouts and cauliflower and broccoli seems like very far away. But yeah. Amanda, how about you?
I'm still waiting on some seeds to come in. Right now, I'm still mostly summer things, and I'm really bad at I always make a plan and then I always just never follow the plan. So we'll see. I mean, I know I still have a lot of brassicas that are kind of hidden throughout things because I stuff a lot of different things, whether in the forest garden or in my different beds. So they're kind of like hidden under other stories. So I'm hoping I can kind of go from there, but trying to think. I've got a few different brassicas that I just brought in, and then I want to see. I got to figure out if I can find a covering for fall and winter that'll help sprouting broccoli, which I haven't grown before, but I really want to try that. And I know you got to kind of cover it. And every year my makeshift coverings don't help the Chicago wind at all, so we'll see.
Right.
But yeah, so we'll see. I know those for sure. I've got a lot of hardier Asian greens that are like not a mix. What is it? Like a mustard greens that I want to mix in, and then I do have Brussels sprouts. I don't know if I'm going to end up putting those out there. We'll see. But yeah, most of it's I really did a lot of summer stuff, so I'm a little behind on fall, but it's all right.
Yeah, it's all right.
How about you? What crops are people picking up from you guys right now?
Yeah, so lots of seeds, lots of like, early spring crops that you can now plant again. So I was just over at my dad's house actually, and I planted some arugula, some collards, some more kale, just an abundance of kale. And actually at the farm, we just harvested a bunch of curry squash, the like bright orange, like round squash. And we were surprised at how early it was ready, but we harvested over half of what we had planted. So we're excited we put it in our greenhouse to cure it, and we're excited to see what we can do with it.
Yeah, we also harvested our winter squash at Grainer, and I missed the harvest itself, but I walked through and I was like, oh my gosh, the greenhouse is already full of winter squash, and it feels like, again, one of those times like, not yet.
Not ready.
So excited for it, yeah.
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 All these amazing like colors filling up the greenhouse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So as folks are getting settled in, if you could just throw in the chat box, we're wondering how you're doing today, how your fall crops are doing. And then once folks get a little bit more settled, we're going to share a cooking demo that Abra very kindly recorded for us. It's going to be a simple green beans recipe. One thing I love about Abra is that your recipes are easily accessible because the ingredients can be like easily substituted. So when I was watching it yesterday, I was like, I have all of that. Yes.
Awesome.
And in the video, she's going to show us how to choose and clean green beans. And then she's also going to walk us through the recipe. And I'll be able to share the recipe in the next week or so with you guys. Yeah. So before I share the video, I want to introduce you guys really quick. So Amanda is the founder and creative director of Baguette and Butter, based in Chicago. Baguette and Butter is a sustainable company dedicated to housing the most transparent, high quality, and sustainable resources, recipes, food, and home goods for city dwellers. And then Abra is a former farmer. chef at Grainer Farms and the author of a cookbook titled Roughage, A Practical Guide to Vegetables. So after we show the cooking video, we'll have a little bit of a conversation about how to reduce waste in the kitchen and how to source locally, all that good, yummy stuff. So we'll get started. Let's see.
So this is one of my favorite summertime dishes, mostly because you can use it with lots of sunflower seed oil, vegetable oil, canola oil, any of that sort of stuff. And we just want to have enough liquid to kind of really. So this is one of my favorite summertime dishes, mostly because you can use it with lots of different things. So if you've got green beans, but you don't have any yogurt, you could use goat cheese or sour cream or ricotta, anything like that. If you don't have chickpeas, you could use lentils or not even crisp them up and just do it with white beans or something like that. Green beans really hit their peak kind of at the end of June and through July, all those things. So we're a little bit ahead of that season. If you wanted to make this with asparagus, you could pan roast it in exactly the same way. Yeah, so let's get started. For cleaning green beans, what you want to do is look at the green beans that you have. I bought these at the grocery store and they are looking pretty good, but a little rough in spots. So what you're looking for in a nice healthy green bean is even in texture, avoiding little bits of divots like that, which are generally signs of age or of the cells starting to break down, things like that. So you can just snap off those less desirable parts. And you're just gonna clean them so that you're basically taking the stem end and what would have been the blossom end off. And I really like it when they're all different lengths and shapes and sizes. So don't feel like you need to trim them up to be exactly the right size. There isn't a right size. And sometimes people talk about stringing beans. That's really if you've got a really tough string, like that one pulled a little bit off. Most green beans you're getting these days are a stringless variety, so it's not as much of something you have to deal with. If you get to a bean like this one that is really bendy and it looks like it's kind of waterlogged, probably mean that it froze in the back of the fridge, and I would just send that one aside. All right, that's how you clean green beans. So this dinner is effectively a one-pot meal, but we're gonna use the frying pan 3 different times. First, to bloom the curry powder for the curried yogurt, and then to crisp up the chickpeas that are gonna go over the top, and then finally to pan fry the green beans. So we're just gonna kick on the burner, pretty high heat. This is a neutral oil, so anything like a sunflower seed oil, vegetable oil, canola oil, any of that sort of stuff. And we just want to have enough liquid to kind of really have enough fat to fry the curry powder. We're of course using Rumi Spices curry powder because they're the best and I love them, love Rumi. And this is about a teaspoon or so. So we're just gonna add a little more. The curry powder to the oil, and then you'll start to see as the oil heats up that the curry powder is just going to start to fry a little bit, and this is effectively just blooming that spice. So the idea is that we're just toasting the spice to really activate the flavors for it. And so it's the same thing, you would do this with any time that you're toasting spices or toasting nuts. It's just activating those flavor volatiles. And it doesn't take that long, so it's worth the extra little bit of time. And you can start to smell it before you really see anything in the pan. But in the pan, you'll see just little bubbles kind of popping around, and you don't want to take it so far that you're burning those really delicate spices, but just enough that once you can start to smell it, you're good. So I'm going to turn off my burner and then lift the oil and go straight into the yogurt. Maybe add a pinch of salt, also hot, and then with your spatula, just get all of that really flavorful oil. And when it hits the yogurt, that means it's also going to stop cooking. So if you say you get a phone call or something while this is going, having it land in that very cold yogurt is going to help stop the cooking immediately. And then you're just stirring it together to combine the oil and the yogurt, make a nice, flavorful sauce. I did add a pinch of salt to it. If you really love curry flavor or any spices, you can always add more than the teaspoon or so that we did. So that's done. And then what we'll do is just give your pan a wipe, and you can either use a kitchen towel or a paper towel, something like that. You don't have to wash it in between. So now we're going to turn on our burner again. And we're going to roast up these chickpeas. So pan frying is really just that. You're getting a little bit of oil hot in a pan so that you can, over direct high heat, add a nice crispness or color, everything from these chickpeas and green beans to you could sear fish or fry a breast of chicken, anything like that. So the only thing to know is that if you have a little bit of water on whatever it is you're going to fry, once it hits that hot oil, it's going to start to spit and sputter, and that's because the water is just immediately getting to a boiling point, and it's kicking off that steam. And with that steam, as it kind of explodes, is going to take some of the oil with it. So I like to give the chickpeas just a little blot dry. And then into the pan, a little bit of salt. And even though we dried them, we're still getting a little bit of sputtering, but you just have to, I don't know, toughen up and stir it anyway. You can also do these in the oven if you want to. So at, say, 350 degrees, toss the chickpeas in some oil. You could add some chili flakes or a little bit of cumin seed if you wanted to, and then oven bake them. And the difference between oven roasting and pan frying is it's the direction of the heat. So pan frying is a really concentrated heat right underneath the pan, and if you leave it long enough, you'll start to get a little bit of browning where it's hitting that pan, that contact. If you put them into the oven, the air around it is what's doing the cooking. So it's a less direct heat, but you're gonna get a more even golden brown, and then also you're gonna lose more moisture. So it'll be a little bit more like a crunchy popcorn in texture, as opposed to these, which will have a little bit of softness still in them. When you're roasting them, you can also start to see the difference in the pan itself. So as you stir, you'll see that one there is not cooked on that side, but that one is. So that one's got a nice golden brown color. And you're just looking for some evenness of browning all the way across. If you have access to a deep fryer, you could also certainly deep fry the chickpeas. I have not yet brought a deep fryer into this house, but maybe someday. We're just gonna give these another minute or two, let them crisp up and get even more golden brown. And these will also last for quite a while. So you could, if you cook off a big batch of chickpeas, these are from a can, but you could cook a big batch, and then on day 3, as you're working through them, fry a few up. Or you could also fry them, keep them on at room temperature and just munch on them as a little snack. Or you could keep them back in the fridge. If you do put them back into the fridge, they'll probably lose their crispness, so you'll have to re-crisp them if you want that outside to be nice and crunchy. All right, so now we're just gonna give this one more flip around. And those are pretty evenly golden across all of the different chickpeas. So I think that that is just fine for our purposes. And transfer them to a bowl just to hold on. And again, this pan is already hot, so no need to wash it. I'm not even gonna wipe it down because we can use some of the residual oil and add a little bit more. Just again, you want enough fat to be able to create a nice crisping. So this is a single portion of green beans that we just cleaned. A little bit of salt. And the other thing about roasting, hand roasting vegetables is that you want to give it enough time to really cook and to blister and get kind of nice and dark on the other side. You could do this on a grill too, but resist the urge to stir constantly, because the more you stir it, the less it has a chance to develop that nice golden crust, and it'll just kind of steam and get soggy. So they've been in there now about 30 seconds or so. You can kind of hear the sound has gotten lower, and that's all of that water has boiled off. So it's had enough time to really connect with the pan and get kind of a brownness to it, and that's when I'll give it a stir. So what you're looking for in doneness, as you look at the beans, you can see like this guy has a little bit of browning on the one side, and they're going to become a darker color, so darker green, and it's going to go from the raw state to the cooked state. I'm going to take my own advice and resist stirring. Give them just another minute or two, and while they are cooking, I'll get the plate that we're going to serve these on. So any sort of platter, plate will be just fine. And this is a really nice dish for something like a barbecue or picnic, because it can be good hot, it can be good room temperature, even cold, it'll be just fine. So giving them another stir. Now that we're starting to see some of that coloring on it, All right, so now the green beans are good and cooked. You've got nice browning, a little bit of blistering on either side. We're gonna turn off our burner and then just immediately transfer them to a platter. You could also serve this in a bowl, or you can add more chickpeas if you wanted it to be more like a grain salad to it. Really, however you dress it up, it's up to you. So we've got our green beans on the platter. And then we're gonna take the roasted chickpeas and just spoon them over the top. Again, use as many or as few as you like. If this is gonna be a full-on side or the protein of your meal, go ahead and load it up with the chickpeas. I'm gonna use about half. And just do it that way. I'm gonna take some of this curry yogurt and just dot it all over. So that you're getting a nice cool pop of the yogurt. And maybe one in the middle for good measure. And then this is just a mixture of picked cilantro leaves, and then I also threw in some microgreens that you could get from a closed loop farm or anywhere. Any sort of mixture of herbs will be great on this. And then just scatter them over the top. And that's your dish. So pan roasted green beans with crispy chickpeas, curry yogurt, and a bunch of herbs on top of that.
Okay, sorry about the technical difficulties at the beginning. So if you have any questions for Abra about that recipe,
Here we are.
hey, feel free to throw them in the chat. And so is this recipe from your, from Roughage?
It is, yeah. So it is, the way that Roughage is organized is it's a vegetable cookbook. So each chapter is a vegetable, and then it's broken out by preparation techniques. So I think in the book, this is the grilled green bean recipe, but I couldn't figure out how to get the camera set up outside with a grill, so we just made it pan fried. And so, yeah, and then the idea is that there's a recipe for like a full cookbook recipe, and then different variations on the flavors that go with it. So yeah, this is one, but like it said in the video, you could use asparagus, or I've made the same thing with summer squash and just seared summer squash, or it would work with winter squash as well, or sweet potato, things like that. So lots of ways to change things around.
Sweet. And so if you are a member of our CSA, I believe you got green beans this week, or if you're picking up next week, you'll get green beans then as well. So this is a great recipe to cook with your CSA box. So I want to ask you both some questions about how you got started working in food, how you became interested in sustainable food systems, and all that good stuff. So Amanda, could you share with us a little bit about where your interest with growing and preserving food began, as well as your interest in sourcing locally?
Yeah, of course. So it's, I guess, an odd journey. Originally, I didn't have any really interest into it. I just knew I wanted to be a chef. I was going to open a restaurant, and this is like me as a child, right? And as I was growing and kind of going through, I worked at a lot of different grocery stores and things like that. So I kind of already had this general idea of sourcing, right? Which day to day people go to the grocery store, and that's where food just appears. Like that's the only thing that we really knew about it. And I think it was really great for me to start there because I was able to kind of learn where food came from, right? So that was the start. And I went to a couple different culinary schools, ended up in Chicago, where I don't know really what the link of it was. I think it was just, I don't know, part of it was just a part of me looking for it, not knowing, but I spent a lot of time, and like we have a little garden area at Kendall College. I don't know if they still have it, but they grew a lot of their own food. So it was the first time I actually could go outside and see thyme growing and like harvest it and bring it back in the kitchen and really see that cycle. And I think I just got hooked to it. And so I found myself, even my internship, I had a small garden, and I was really just kind of going into that. And I didn't really take a larger jump of how to apply it in my own life until after I graduated and moved back to Detroit for, it was about 2 years. And I was working at a corporate company at the time. So we didn't have any kind of local, any kind of idea of like the connection. And I felt disconnected as a cook or a chef. And I know I learned a lot of different things and how to make them, but they didn't really focus on the sourcing. You know, I knew asparagus had rubber bands wrapped around it, but I had no idea how they were grown. I had no connection to the source of it. So in 2016, I gave up the grocery store for a year. I was like, I'm going to learn how to connect with local food. I'm going to see if it's possible to connect with local food. It was a poorly timed idea because I started it in January in Detroit, and I'm like, yeah, like this will be smart. And I just like ate potatoes for 3 months straight. It was pretty sad. And then I moved back to Chicago during that time in February. So I had to figure out if I still wanted to continue to try and do this. And I did. And I started, that's when I started gardening. I got an allotment. I bought an allotment for my birthday. I was in a less than 300, I think 250 to 300 square foot apartment. So I was growing some herbs in my apartment. I had my allotment, and that was my first really go at growing food. And I started to kind of preserve. I had very, very limited space, but I was starting to create this little larder concept that I talk about now. And so that was really the start of it all. And then I realized as I was just kind of using Baguette and Butter, which was already my blog of just talking about my journey with food, I was able to talk about it. And then I noticed that people wanted to know more about it. And so I just started teaching all the different aspects of my life, and sustainability kind of naturally flows into gardening and eating locally. And yeah, it just kind of became an obsession that was a lifestyle, I guess. I don't know, but I love it. And it's really fun to be able to connect with farmers and community with it.
Sweet, thanks. Yeah, I feel like asparagus is one of those kind of like entry points into this, other way of looking at food. Like I remember being a senior at Kalamazoo College, and I was taking a class at with some farmers at Harvest of Joy farm just outside of Kalamazoo, and I remember seeing asparagus growing out of the ground for the first time. And
Amanda, did you lose Lola too?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe she disconnected, but I think is everyone else on? That's
Hopefully everybody else can hear. Well, just while we wait for Lola to maybe come back online, yeah, she was talking about asparagus and seeing it for the first time, and that was also one of my entry points into the local food movement. Lola, are you back?
yeah, sorry, the internet went out at our office. Sorry.
Okay. So you were talking about seeing asparagus for the first time outside of Kalamazoo.
Yes, yeah. And I feel like that was like a point for me.
Yeah. Are you back? Oh, no.
I know that, until she hops back on, I know that you're still growing asparagus at Grainer, right? Because you gave me some asparagus. That was my first time actually growing it. It's
yeah. Awesome. Yeah, we bought that for our house, for our home garden. But yeah, the same thing was asparagus. When I was working at Zingerman's Deli in Ann Arbor, Roger Bowser, who's the chef there and managing partner there now, was really trying to pull in as much local produce into that menu as possible, especially because it's such a high volume place, so we can really absorb a large amount. And we, as a staff, were going to pick asparagus for the menu. And it was the first time I had ever seen it grown. I mean, I grew up around asparagus growers, asparagus and celery, but had never done it myself. There isn't like you pick asparagus anywhere. So we went out to these fields and we're snapping asparagus, and it's just such a wild looking plant. And then Roger literally just snapped one off and like basically shoved it into my mouth, and it was the first time I'd ever had raw asparagus. And I was just like, oh yeah, you can eat it. And then seeing it, you know, and that was the first place where we snapped it, and it was the first time I started cutting the ends to make all the asparagus the same size. And I think that was one of the first times thinking about sustainability in a new way, was like, well, if it's snapped from the ground, like it doesn't matter if they're all the same length, use everything that's there. And that's true in like all sorts of different ways of just being sure you're like scraping out the bowls entirely, and, you know, scraping off the spoons and not wasting anything. But I just remember that so clearly, how different of a product that asparagus was from what I grew up eating, you know. And I think it's cool that everybody had their own like little asparagus journey.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it's definitely one of those vegetables. And when people tour I won't say tour the garden, they come over and they kind of just walk around the garden. That's always the vegetable that they can't identify, and they're just like, wait, what is it? And I'm like, no, like it's actually it's asparagus, and this is, I think, what is it, year 3?
Mm-hmm.
Jeez, man. Year 3, so now it's actually like kind of starting to flourish and actually getting a harvest out of it. And honestly, this year, I think it's been 3 years since I planted a lot of major trees and things like that. So there's a lot more coming in. And then I also have CSAs, and then some other farmers just like drop off like 50 pounds of cucumbers just because if not, they're going to waste. So I'm just like preserving and just kind of trying to save all these vegetables. But you start to see like some of these perennials that you plant, it just takes a little effort and a little bit of money to put in there. And as long as you take care of it each year, you just kind of autopilot the whole situation. And so it's kind of crazy to go out there. And I remember picking some this year, and I'm like, I'm still picking asparagus. Like I wasn't really aware of the abundance that I was going to have from it. So that's kind of cool too.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head too, that for me also the responsibility to food really changed when I was growing it. So when we started Bare Knuckle Farm in 2009, and Lola, I know you and I have talked about that too, about that disconnect for a lot of people between how much work goes into growing this food and then not being willing to waste even a leaf of basil or a single cherry tomato. And I think that that's such a powerful thing. And I think that's why what you do at Keep Growing Detroit and what you do at Baguette and Butter is so important, because it just gives people multiple entry points. And I think there's a misconception that farming happens in rural spaces and that it happens only in 100-acre or 1,000-acre allotments. And yeah, I just think that that's really, really amazing, both the work that you guys are doing.
Did Lola pop back on by chance, or is she still?
Yes, I think I'm back. I'm having internet issues, sorry.
I didn't see the little thing pop up on the side. Welcome back.
Thank you. So also speaking to like the work that goes into growing food, like, you know, at Keep Growing Detroit, we're all farmers this season, right? Because of COVID-19. And so even though I've worked at Keep Growing Detroit for about 2.5 years now, it's given me that much more perspective, right? Being at the farm, like, 3 to 4 days out of the week, it definitely has given me a new appreciation for the produce that I'm bringing home too. So speaking of COVID, I'm wondering for both of you, how have your grocery shopping routines changed as a result? Like, are there things that you're doing differently? Has it forced you to shop even more locally than usual? What are some of the changes and positives from it?
Amanda, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. I was like, let me just wait. So typically my usual kind of cycle of seasons, by spring, I am pretty much clearing out the kitchen. So I like anything that's in the little larder or the freezer, I'm just trying to kind of empty everything out, reset, and then get ready for spring where I can eat everything kind of fresh again. And so this was a definite pivot of, man, I should have preserved more and not eaten everything, and I could have had a little bit more stocked away. So when everything first really kind of started shuttering in Chicago, I definitely kind of had to pull from this frugality standpoint. So I didn't really buy a lot of like processed things or anything like that. And I ended up in response to COVID creating a digital guide called the City Dweller's Guide to Living Frugal AF, which is really, I'm going to redo it when I have the time to in January, but it was really a quick digital guide where I could write down all the like essential shopping list aspects of just kind of general flour, salt, sugar kind of things. Because I was watching a lot of people grab things at the grocery store at that time, and everyone's going for the flour and things like that, but they're missing all of the produce items. And so you would see all of these peppers just sitting here, and I'm like, you can buy these peppers and freeze them. Like there was a little just tiny frugal kind of preserving or just simple ways that you could take some things that were available and use them. And then I also just provided different, like how to soak different grains and things like that, just kind of ratios for people, as well as simple recipes, just to kind of get people acclimated, hopefully as easy as possible. So I ended up having to buy a few different things that I don't typically buy that weren't as local, but after we got kind of settled into being at home more often, which I already kind of worked from home, so it wasn't too much of a pivot, but I found myself buying larger quantities and planning to preserve more. So it was kind of ironic because all of the events that I do, I was planning to have all these events, so I had some preserves for it. But a lot of the grains I did purchase locally, and I just bought them in bulk amounts, and then I just saved them. And I've got all of my staples that are in that guide I have in these kind of larger quart containers. And we already favor Costco as well for like purchasing gas a little bit cheaper. So I would buy the sugar, which happens to be from Michigan. I was like, that's perfect. And it's in paper. And then we got a big bag of rice, which was also in paper. And I'm not exactly sure where the rice was from when we got it. But just looking for things that were in larger quantities, because all of the bulk bins kind of shuttered and closed up with co-ops and things like that. But other than that, I think really the only thing that I changed the most was planning to preserve. I mean, you can kind of see my little larder is not as little as it's supposed to be anymore, and just kind of hoping to create a like tiny root cellar situation. So in our little larder virtual class, I'm kind of going through each bit, and underneath the table here, I've got all of my onions, so I'm trying to store them properly. So I just have a little bit more reassurance going into winter, especially because in the Midwest, if we don't have to go anywhere, it's a lot easier to just say, I'm at home, I got my food, it's cold, and you don't really have to worry about it. So that's been the biggest pivot for me, is making sure I'm like stocking up and preserving and like getting the beans and the rice and everything like that I have. Then I can just take things from the garden or my CSA and just make very quick meals, just like the one that Abra made earlier. It's reassuring to just know that you have that there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a similar experience in that every year, instead of doing a New Year's resolution, I try to do the year of something. And this year, one of the year ofs was the year of the pantry. And like it started with a jar of split peas that I think I bought like 4 years ago and just never used. And so it was like, I need to like be cycling through these things and remembering that I bought them for a reason. So just use them. And so when the pandemic hit, I was really surprised, similar to what Amanda said, about seeing all of the shelf stable things be gone, but then the produce sections were still extremely well stocked. And I had a couple of other friends say that they were, using the cookbook more because they were suddenly at home and cooking more, and that there was always fresh produce at their market, and there maybe weren't some of those other staples. So I found that for me, and often so much of the year I'm being fed by Grainers, the gleanings at Grainer, the stuff that isn't perfect enough for market. And so it was a funny time in March and April when we didn't have that much coming from the farm. And so suddenly I was at the grocery store in a totally different way than I normally would be, which is normally I would go and buy those staple ingredients like flour, beans, stuff like that. And then suddenly I was like using up all the stuff in our freezer and using up all the stuff in the dry pantry, but going to the market for produce and figuring out how to buy produce for 2 weeks so that we could minimize our trips. But normally it would be the produce cycles through much faster than that. So it was about really paying attention to what I was buying and having a good product mix, in the sense of, instead of just buying all the tender salad greens, being sure that I bought some cabbage, some kale and collards and mustards and hardier stuff like that, so I could go through the salad greens to start, and then work through the leafier things, and then into the cabbage before we would go back and still have fresh salads with it. And then we did also started using our basement as more of a root cellar. So buying a larger bag of storage potatoes and things like that, and then trying to keep sure that those are staying at a constant temperature. But yeah, so it was just kind of thinking about it in a different way. And also I very rarely meal plan. And so it was nice to have the time and to be eating at home so much more, to actually think through a weekly meal plan, and cooking off, you know, a big pot of lentils, and then using those lentils differently, if it be, you know, just as a warm grain with something, or turning them into a fritter, or then the final day turning them into like frying them like we did with the chickpeas in the video. Or then finally, when I was like, I'm so tired of lentils, we can now make lentil soup and it feels different. So really kind of thinking through, and I think it did help me think about batch cooking in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so both of you kind of touched on my next question, which is like, what's your process when you get home, either from the grocery store or with your CSA box? Like, what's the first thing you do? And like, how do you kind of, what's the order that you go through in storing things and eating things?
I guess we can kind of do the whole rotation thing. So for CSAs, I think my CSA shows up, sorry.
Okay.
My CSA shows up on Wednesday, probably Wednesday night, late afternoon. But I still have, for some reason, I consider it a clean fridge Friday, which it can be any day of the week, if not Friday, but it's just kind of the how I share it. And so pretty much before I even get my CSA, I go to a farmer's market, really go outside to harvest. I always clean my fridge on a certain day. And what that helps me do is it helps me to, one, see what's going in there, what's going on, if anything is starting to, you know, rot, or what's happening, if I need to preserve something really quickly. And it really just sets the tone for the new stuff coming in. So I know I need to start cooking with this stuff that's in here first. As the new stuff comes in, there might be some things that I'll cook throughout the week, but I'm already kind of FIFOing, like first in, first out of what's in my fridge. When I get my CSA, which typically is kind of the first amount of food for the week, I will take everything out of the box. And then I have, so my field guides, I've got some hiding behind me, but we're working on a collection of 4 seasonal field guides. And the purpose that I came up with these for, it's kind of been on and off in the works in different formats for years, but the final version of it now is really so that people can learn to, and for myself too, because I always forget, but to learn how to actually store produce properly. And so, like, for instance, like these tomatoes are from my garden and I have them sitting out here. And it also kind of helps me to know, like, I have this many slicing tomatoes I have to get through. But if you just kind of throw everything in the fridge, in any part of the fridge, it won't necessarily last as long. And it seems easy to take your CSA and just chuck it in the fridge, but then you don't know what's in there. Something gets lost and sad in the back and you start having all this food waste. And it's happened to me, trust me, when I have 17 cucumbers in my fridge right now. Like I'm running out of space in there. So I understand the battle with it, but just by intentionally kind of taking that time to clean and reset, but then also storing them properly, it just kind of expands that shelf life. So for me, while I might have 2 weeks of certain vegetables in my fridge from my CSA that I haven't gotten to yet, they're still good and they're not going bad or anything like that. So that definitely is the major one that I spend time on, because I know even if I get busy, I get takeout, anything that happens like that, I know my food's not going to go bad right away. And then I always have certain things that I'm preserving too. Other than that, anything from farmers markets or stores, I try and, like I showed you these things, I try and decant them. This just makes it easier for me because I like to be able to see my food. I don't have labels on my food either, but I like to be able to see how much I have, and being able to have a kind of simplified, organized pantry in that way makes it so that you can see everything for what it is. There's nothing hiding. There's not anything like wrapped up in foil. That's huge because you know what you need to use, you know how much you have. I grew up in a household with my mom and my mom and my dad both are big, like, food hoarders, who they'll have a lot of Costco items. They'll have a lot of we'll go to like 3 mega stores, 4 mega stores in a weekend, and she would buy a bag of potatoes, and she would already have 2 bags of potatoes hiding in another drawer. So that's always making sure that I have a very clean and easy way of looking through my pantry and storing it in that same format. And then anything that I just kind of buy at random, I try and keep in a different space. And then for things in the garden, it's a little bit harder because you can't really predict what you're going to have. Like all of this and the cucumbers I just harvested a couple days ago, and I just got rid of the tomatoes. As you saw on Instagram, I was making Abra's spicy tomato soup just to put up for winter, and then I go out there and there's more. So that's a little bit more difficult to kind of understand. But the one thing to kind of think ahead of is when you're harvesting a lot of different vegetables, and it's really great that you're harvesting them, kind of understand what intention you have with them. Because if you know you're not going to use them right away, it's really good to have some kind of preserving idea or recipe for the things you're growing in your garden. So for the slicing tomatoes, typically I don't use those to can and preserve, but I knew that the tomatoes Abra used for that recipe were very similar to the varieties I was growing. And so I knew I wasn't going to eat them. They were going to start going bad. I meant to give some away to my partner's mom and totally forgot them. And, the whole cycle goes on of abundance of food. So instead I made tomato soup. I knew I could make it. I knew I could freeze it. And then now I've got maybe about 8 quarts that I have set aside. So it's always kind of thinking one step ahead of yourself, even though you have all this food coming in once a week. And that really helps to prevent food waste. And it just makes it a lot more relaxing to not have to worry about wasting all the food that you have coming in from the garden or the CSA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Love your honesty about how many cucumbers there are in your fridge.
I'm like, every year I'm like, I'm not growing cucumbers again. And then I'm like, 2 cucumber plants, yay! No.
Like cucumber and zucchini mania. It's like every year I'm like, why is there so much zucchini? But
who put this here?
Exactly. Who panic bought that in the spring? Yeah, I feel like my process is really similar to Amanda's. I think the big thing for me was getting to a place where I was going to be honest with myself about what my week looked like too. So it's like, there's just some weeks that I'm not going to get to it all. And so trying to make a kind of a plan for that. And so, sometimes if it's a week where I know that I'm going to be like running all day, every day, when I get that first, box of food, either from the farm or from the market, whatever, I'll go ahead and kind of pre-prep some of that. I think in general, rule of thumb, the less you do to a vegetable, the longer it's going to last, unless it already has a blemish in it. So in general, I don't really advocate for pre-slicing a bunch of cabbage or pre-slicing a bunch of kale. But I also found that when I didn't do that, sometimes just the act of cutting that up was enough of a hurdle for me to get dinner on the table and to use that stuff. And I was like, the lure of takeout was like much brighter. And so kind of just like coming to terms with that. And so looking at my week, being like, this is what's going to be here. It's just going to be here, and having it sort of ready to go. And then also I think the flip side to that is just like what Amanda was saying, looking at, what's the status of your produce? And as soon as you've got something that has, we always call it vegetable triage, because it's the same sort of idea as an emergency room where something comes in, you're going to look at it, assess it, and make a plan for it. And if you, like I had a bunch of eggplant that I brought home, and there were a couple where the stems had stabbed each other. And so those are not going to last as long. And so being sure that those are going to get roasted first, that they're at the top of the pile of the ones you're going to use, things like that. And so I think that that's a pretty important step to it. And then I think Amanda's really right about like what you can see is really makes it easier to cook with. So I really just I try to avoid putting stuff into the drawers of my fridge, except for things that I know that we'll remember are there or that we'll use. So like I will put like the cheeses and, any salamis or sandwich meat or things like that in the drawers, because I'm fairly confident that the lure of making a sandwich will force us to open those drawers and look inside. The lure of a cucumber salad is maybe not as forefront of our minds always. And so if all of that produce is up there, then we can see it and remember to use it. And then also thinking about having a couple of those recipes that you can just like hoover up a bunch of the odds and ends. I love the idea of a clean fridge Friday, and I'm going through it. And then inevitably there's like 1 carrot, 1 cucumber, like a little bit of cauliflower. And so I think for me, it was also about expanding like what is a salad. And thinking about like like a coleslaw is also a salad. And so you can make coleslaw with kohlrabi and cabbage and red cabbage and all of that carrot, all of those things, and just make sort of a slaw out of it. And then that can go with any number of things. And I'm a big condiment lover. And I feel like that's been my real key too, is like, let all of the vegetables change, but then have those staple pantry items and a few condiments on hand, so that if I've got all of those stray vegetables and a little jar of like, a vinaigrette or something like that, I can just whip it up really fast. And I used to think that those were kind of crutches, and now they feel like tools in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Someone was asking, oh, Amanda answered it.
I was hiding in the background doing.
Yeah, you're good. So Sonia asked, if you're growing herbs at home, what would be the best way to dry out your herbs and keep them? So Amanda, do you want to share?
Yeah, I can share it. I wasn't sure if you want me to type on there.
Yeah, no.
I'm not often on Zoom, so I was playing with the software. So with dehydrating, it's one of my favorite preservation methods, and I was actually talking about this yesterday with someone. And there's a couple of like quick preservation methods you can use to prevent food waste. So dehydrating foods is definitely one of them. And it took me maybe like 5 years to actually get a dehydrator, and I never even talked myself into it. Someone gave it to me. And I honestly think it's one of those things, especially if you have a garden or CSA, anything where you've got an abundance of vegetables and fruits coming in, they have some version of that. You can dry them out by hanging them. You can put them in a low temperature oven as well. But I mean, the oven, it's kind of, you have to babysit it. You're also just using a lot of energy to have that oven on for a long time. And you can't really change the temperature to what you want. I think the lowest oven temperature is around 200 degrees, and that's the highest temperature a dehydrator would be. So you really want to kind of play with that. You can hang them, but I find it's possible. I just find that it's not always convenient because we often forget to turn them and check on different things when we're preserving. But if you have it in an area, you're going to constantly see it and turn it. There's a lot of airflow. You can hang it in a cool, dry, low light, dark place, kind of not in direct sunlight, and they will dry completely. Only reason I don't suggest doing that is in the Midwest, we have some funky weather, and it's just, if you have air conditioning, or for instance, I have my windows open all the time, and if it rains and the humidity just kind of throws everything. So it can kind of be a little bit harder to dehydrate that way, but just having a dehydrator is so easy, because I can just take my herbs or take vegetables. Like if I have grapes that are going bad or any kind of fruit, I'll just throw them in there, turn it on, and just leave for my day and know that they're already drying out. There's some that are not super expensive, but you can kind of play with those 3 options. They're not all bad, and it's worth trying it. And then always, I don't know if Abra's going to probably say anything about this, but because I worked under Abra's kitchen. I don't want to say kitchen reign, because it wasn't a reign, it was more of a community, but kitchen community. She does a lot of herb oils, and I love that, especially with the CSA herbs I get, because sometimes I'm not expecting them, and I'm like, oh, I'm not going to use this fast enough, and even if you do put them in the fridge right away, they don't last as long as other vegetables. So, excuse me. So I really love that idea as well, and it kind of works with what she was saying too about having different condiments in your fridge to kind of change and enhance different meals. And so I like doing that as well. If you can't dehydrate, if you try it out and you don't have a dehydrator and it kind of ends up molding or something like that, you can always use that preservation method as well.
Yeah, I mean, Amanda's got it. She's got all the right stuff. We also will make sometimes an herb salt. And so we'll take in a food processor like the parsley stems and parsley leaves and any really herb you got except for the chives, because it makes it pretty oniony, and then pulse that up and you could even cut them by hand and then toss them with the salt. And I usually add a little bit of sugar too. So I think it's usually 5 parts salt, 1 part sugar. And then mix that together. And it's very similar. You can think about for any preservation thing, the traditional preservation methods are, like Amanda was saying, dehydrating, getting them to a shelf-stable place, preserving it in oil. So very similar. When I think about those herb oils, I think about like duck confit or some of those sorts of things where you're getting it to a place where the oil is going to keep the bad bacteria off. And then the same is true for the salt. So similar to salt-packed anchovies, salt-packed capers, the salt is really going to preserve those herbs in that way because it's going to pull the moisture out of it and then stabilize it and make it so salty that no bad bacteria can grow. But yeah, I think as far as drying it, Amanda's right on with that.
Sweet. And Abra, I know in the CSA unpacking video that you did for us, you talked a little bit about like how you can tell if it's time to compost certain produce or whether you can, you know, maybe just shift the way that you were planning to use it. Could you give us a couple of examples of like some produce, how you can tell when it's time to compost it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. It's like, I think we all want to avoid food waste so much, but sometimes it's just being like admitting that like it's just gone too far. And so for greens and things like that, I think I often you're using your multiple senses. So it's things like looking at it and seeing if the greens have gotten, are they actually rotty or are they just wilty? And if they're just wilty, they can either be revived, or if you're going to saute them, something like kale, then you're just going to wilt them further. So that's fine, you know. But if they've got yellowing, signs of actual breaking down of the cells, if it smells funky, if it's slimy, all of those are things saying like bacteria has taken over, and leave it alone. And then just cutting your losses. You know, I think we talked about this a lot when Amanda and I worked together at Local Foods, that we would preserve and salvage so many things coming out of that warehouse because that was part of our job. The thing that was the hardest to do were greens, because as soon as you get a little bit of that like swampiness in there, you can go through and you can sort them. It takes a lot of time, and it means that everything is on its way out. And so it's really best to try to really focus on getting that while it's still good. And then as far as some of the other vegetables, not greens related, I think it is, again, just about using your senses in that way, where if you've got a cucumber, like Amanda was saying, and you've got one end that's a little bit shrivelly, is the rest of it still nice and firm? And so then you can just cut just that part away, as opposed to thinking that the entire thing has gone bad. And oftentimes, 80% of it is fine. And even if it's a little shrivelly, it means it's going to be a little bit drier, but it's not necessarily rotten. And so it's not going to hurt you any. It just might not be perfect. And I feel like right now, tomato season, tomatoes are the like prime candidate for that, because especially those big heirlooms, there's a reason they're heirlooms and people don't really want to grow them on a commercial level, and it's because they split all the time. They have huge cores, all that stuff. And so a lot of times it's looking at it, cutting away the bad, and then recognizing you still have some of this good and trying to showcase that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And then Amanda, I know I'm curious about how you avoid like food packaging waste. I know you were talking earlier about like buying in bulk and trying to buy things with like paper packaging. Could you share a little bit more about how you strategize around reducing packaging waste?
Of course, yeah. So I try and take a different approach. I know there's a lot of zero wasters and people in the like zero waste, low waste community that opt for promoting package-free bulk options. For where I live, it's not really a convenience to drive to a co-op and to actually access or source package-free items and using bulk bins and bringing your own jars. So I really appreciate that I have this perspective, because most people don't have the access to it or have the time to drag jars around all the time. But again, a lot of people have Costco memberships, even though it's not local per se, or if you do have a local co-op or something like that, or even if you can contact the farm directory. One of the things we came up with during COVID was we have a farm to home directory that's on our website. And so a lot of the links to the websites to farms and Jane's Mill, for instance, you can go online and purchase a 25-pound bag of flour and things like that. So by being intentional about the staples, like taking out a lot of those middle aisle foods that we probably shouldn't have in our bodies at all or as often. I'm not going to judge anyone if they want to have chips or things like that, but keeping away from the foods that aren't really real food items already helps. And then by just understanding the staples or things that you have to purchase, 9 times out of 10, they're already in more sustainable packaging. Sometimes it can be hard to find because for some reason they'll have different forms of packaging. But I love doing different things from Costco. Like if you have to get canned tomatoes, you can get a larger can, which is going to use less packaging. And then the same thing with grains. Even if it is in plastic, you can get a larger container, which helps rather than having constant small boxes of the same product and you're using more of that. So that's one of the big things I look for. If I can find things in the right kind of packaging, if I can find them package free. It's one qualm I have with Costco and Trader Joe's. They put everything prepackaged in plastic, which drives me bananas. But for the inevitable packaging that does happen, one of the few things is be resourceful, and either you can try and find a second use. It kind of can suck sometimes because you're still creating waste. But for instance, instead of buying dog bags, I use any of the leftover bags from if I buy bread or something like that. So I try and create a second life for it. And then I also have in my back porch, I have a kind of little recycling center, so to speak. So there are certain things like corks that I save from wine, all of our plastic bags we save, and we either reuse them for multiple uses if I have friends come over and they want produce and things like that, or I drop them off at Target. So we just also make sure that you're diverting the waste is really important. And that always helps because there's always going to be something that has some type of odd packaging. I really hope that larger companies kind of adjust to that. And also just being able to simplify what you're bringing in your kitchen by having the staple aspect to it, and then shopping locally or having a garden, you're already having less packaging to start. So, when you go to a farmer's market, or if you have a CSA, you might get some compostable bags, you might get some packaging, but you can kind of avoid it a little bit because you're able to kind of connect one-on-one with that farmer. So for instance, one of the examples, instead of me going to my local farmer's market and getting my blueberries in a plastic bag, I bring a jar with me, and I ended up bringing a funnel this time because blueberries go everywhere, but I bring a jar and a funnel. I know I'm going to buy a certain amount, and I'll just ask them if they can take it, and I have a clean jar, and they pour the blueberries in there. It helps. So one, my blueberries get home in one piece because that's always hard at the market, but 2, it helps that I don't have that extra piece of packaging. So that's one of the things too at markets that can help. I think there's other ways, but I'll ramble on forever about that stuff, but that's pretty much it.
Something I really learned from Amanda too is that there is an industry of people who are trying to sell us more sustainable options. And I think that is a good problem to have, but it's still stuff. And one of the things that really opened my eyes as wanting to, learn from Amanda and take more care in my sustainable packaging, she was like, don't go out and buy an entire new kitchen of things to take waste away, because then you're going to get rid of that stuff. And so you can figure out how to add, a reusable container when the plastic one that you got from the store, you've used it 10 times and it finally breaks, then you can bring it in, or then bring in a produce bag or something like that. And so you're trying to avoid waste on all of those levels. And I really like what she said too about using a plastic bag instead of buying poop bags for our dog. We did this at Local Foods too, where we would go through so many bread bags. And I was like, wait, I can start saving those and then using that to pick up. And then if we think about it, it only feels like, well, it's just one more time that we're using it, but that cuts the need for them in half. So it's exponential. And I think that, then if you do it again, that's again half as much plastic that's out there, or half as much of this thing. And those are real gains. And I think that there's often a part of the conversation that's like, if you throw anything away, it's evil. And it's yeah, okay, sure. But it's not really going to work that way. And so I think just doing the best you can and not feeling like there's some standard that you have to meet is like really a great first step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, cool. So as we wrap up, I'm wondering how can folks stay up to date on what you guys are working on, and how can folks also support your work? I know, Amanda, you both have books that are available for purchase right now. So how can folks support you?
Yeah, so I have my field guides. I know we're working on our fall one is releasing, and we should have pre-orders starting at the end of August, and they'll be shipping out in September. We still have spring and summer. There is overlap. There's kale in the summer one, so there's overlap, but it does talk about the different profiles as I drop them. So you guys can just see a little bit of the inside. These are all just kind of self-published of being able to do that. So this is one way to, honestly, more so than supporting me, to support the food waste that's in your kitchen is the main goal of that. But other than that, always just sharing what we're doing is huge for us. We have a Patreon account as well, and that's really helping us get to our other goals. We have a lot of different food videos that we want to create, as well as we want to create a hardcover preservation book down the line. So we're just kind of slowly building our membership platform for that. So that's really where we gain a lot of our support. But yeah, just following along and really taking the resources that work for you is the biggest help for me. Whatever works for you is going to be the best useful support out there. So
yeah, the illustrations in your book are beautiful, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, I use a local friend. She normally does wedding cards and things like that, and I contacted her, and I was super surprised I was even able to get these books out during everything happening, which was just amazing. But they're really beautiful. All the covers are inspired by the garden, and I just wanted them to be small enough to fit into your farmer's market tote to take with you, so that if you do, if you find, for instance, garlic scapes in the spring, you can also see what other foods they pair with to be inspired by what else you can do with them. And I think, honestly, they work really good in tandem with Abra's book as well, because you kind of get these foods, you can have other things that you can work with, and then she kind of showcases other ways that you can cook them and use condiments, and kind of, you see the cycle of life that goes through your refrigerator and the things you have, which is really great too.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll share my website in the chat as well, in case anyone wants to peruse that. But everything's on my website.
Great. And then Abra, how can folks keep up with you?
I've got less going on than Amanda does. So I just have the one thing. The cookbook's name is Roughage. Ideally, if you're able to buy a copy from your local bookstore, to support those businesses right now. And then the best way to support me is also to support your local growers. And so, especially through Keep Growing Detroit, I mean, I'm always floored by the fact that Michigan is the second most agriculturally diverse state in the nation. And to, again, to have 1,900 farms that Keep Growing Detroit is supporting, I think diverting any of your available food budget to that is a really valuable thing. And then beyond that, if you ever come over to the west or the northwest side of the state, I cook at Grainer Farm when we're able to do farm dinners, but we have an online farm store that people can pre-order and then pick up on Fridays. And then I also am spending time up in Leelanau County at a place called Farm Club, which is also a 35-acre farm with a market, a restaurant, and a brewery. So if you find yourself on the road, then come and say hi in either of those places.
Sweet. I want to thank you guys so much for joining us. And I hope you all have a great rest of your Saturday. We'll post the recording of this cooking class and conversation to our YouTube page. And then, of course, afterwards, I'll send, when the recipe is available, I'll send that out, and as well as both your guys' websites. So thanks again, and have a great.
Thanks for organizing and putting it all together. And Amanda, thanks for taking the time.
Of course, you too.
Bye.
Bye.